The global pandemic has caused an unprecedented change in education that has been discussed in Parliament by both Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, who stated that he wanted this to be the generation not scarred by the pandemic. Even the former Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield, said that it was impossible to overstate how damaging the global pandemic has been to children, and that now is the time to rethink the way we care for them. Often in times of global crisis, innovations in education can occur. In the post-war years, when children were living in great poverty, an Italian doctor called Maria Montessori tried to transform the lives of the children she was working with. This innovation became known as the Montessori method. Maria Montessori was born in 1870 and was raised in a household that encouraged her to pursue education. She broke through barriers and boundaries for women at the time to become one of the first female doctors in Italy. In 1897, she joined a research programme in a psychiatric clinic at the University of Rome. Here she observed children with mental disorders, and through these observations she believed it was the lack of sensory stimulation that had resulted in the decline and limitation of these children. In 1907, she opened her first school with the strong belief that if you created a favourable environment for children, it would enable them to not only flourish, but also learn independently.
I would describe Maria Montessori as a pioneer. She was an Italian doctor, an educator, an innovator, and has become acclaimed for an educational method that builds on the way that children learn naturally.
She was an educational activist who, for the first time, probably in that era, put the child at the centre of the philosophy of education rather than the adult at the centre. Through her innovation of sitting, observing, watching the child, she challenged those present time practices in the classroom to bring about change, to give more opportunity to the child to develop. She was a lady doctor who created a philosophy of education based on scientific findings, now termed as the Montessori method of education.
I think she was a researcher at heart, a kindred spirit, if you will. I really can connect with her spirit as someone who asked questions and wanted to understand why and wanted to think about how education could be better for children.
I think she's also been described as a feminist and an advocate and an activist, and that's part of her work that I'm really interested in. So as a women's rights advocate, she lobbied for equal pay for women, was recognised in Italy as a leading feminist, and was also an advocate for children, particularly those with special educational needs as well. And a pacifist in the face of the fascist movement in Italy as well.
She was always gathering data, always gathering evidence, always analysing. Clearly a woman before her time. I think she was an inspiration, all of those things that I think everyone agrees about her, but the thing that really attracts me to her story is her spirit as a researcher.
She opened her first Montessori school, the Casa dei Bambini, or Children's House, in Rome in 1907, and then subsequently travelled the world and wrote extensively about her approach to education. And there are now thousands of Montessori schools in countries across the world.
The Montessori approach is based upon a set of principles that guide the design of the classroom environment, the interaction that adults have with children, and of course the activities the children engage in. The Montessori approach is not curriculum-led, but led by the child. The overarching principle is that the teachers must meet the needs of the child, observing them closely. This way, the teachers are able to know them better and provide what the child needs. A phrase that is often heard within Montessori is to follow the child. Embedded in the Montessori approach is trust in the child and allowing them to develop their inner discipline to become more independent thinkers, able to make their own decisions based on what they believe is right. The method developed by Maria Montessori was wholly for the benefit of the child, allowing them to develop naturally and have their needs both understood and met, so that society as a whole would ultimately benefit.
The first that comes to mind is the idea of the absorbent mind. So children unconsciously soaking up information from their environment, learning at a rapid rate, and it's almost as if the child absorbs like a sponge. I think that's probably the easiest way to explain it.
The biggest sort of distinguishing feature is the individualized nature of Montessori education and how it is really responsive to the needs of individual children. To me, the real core fundamental piece of it is respecting each individual child.
There's also the idea of sensitive periods. So Montessori noticed that each child moves through periods of interest and concentration in certain areas of their development. So these are sort of windows of opportunity. And I think if those sensitive periods are properly supported, then optimal learning takes place.
Because it's almost a fluid curriculum, we can work with children and empower children to have learning that moves with those times. So you never lose those basic principles, you never lose the basic understanding, you never lose the basic philosophical stance, but you build your practices to meet the current times and to give children the opportunity to develop themselves to be children of the future.
So not only viewing the child as sort of capable and competent, but planning the curriculum essentially for the individual child. So that respect for uniqueness is a really key part of it. If you walked into a Montessori classroom, you would see children with a great degree of freedom. So they would be very busy but very quiet, just sort of moving around the classroom and making their choices from a range of options. So be that sort of buzz in the classroom, that sense of purpose, but also a real calm. And I think that helps children's concentration be nurtured.
When you go in, the first thing that should be special and unique is the calmness and the unclutteredness that you feel. And I think wherever you go into a Montessori environment, wherever it is in the world, you should get that feeling of calm and tranquility, and that it's genuinely a safe place to be.
It's very thoughtfully prepared. So there are specific teaching materials that are, many of them original to when they were designed 100 years ago. And they're organised by subject area in the classroom and accessible to children all of the time.
I think the organization of the classroom that allows the children to work through the academics in such a way that it leaves them feeling empowered is not just a sense of being empowered academically, but also empowered as human beings. And I think that's evident.
And also this idea of what we'd probably describe as a discovery model, really, where students or children are learning ideas from working with materials in a very hands-on way, rather than just that direct instruction from the teacher. The power dynamic, I think, between the adult and the child is perhaps different from some conventional approaches. So the Montessori trained teacher is really experienced in observing an individual child's characteristics and their tendencies and their interests and talents. So rather than responding to perhaps an external timetable or curriculum, it's a very responsive and personalised approach, I think, to the needs of those children.
If I think about it in terms of academic subjects, I think that the math materials are incredible. I learned things about math in the parent afternoons in my children's classes that I didn't know until I saw them concretely expressed in the materials.
Some of the skills that I think are important in the Montessori approach are around active learning and the way that links to independence. So independence, I think, is a really, really key element of the Montessori philosophy, that we nurture children towards this independent living from a very young age, really, both in terms of their skills around self-care, whether that's learning how to button your coat or put your shoes on, right the way through to working independently with materials in the classroom and beyond into primary years, really, around managing your own work and timetable independently, as children in a Montessori primary classroom would to some extent.
Another skill that's required for success academically is motivation and self-discipline and just a sense of curiosity. And I think that there's so many aspects of Montessori that really contribute to that sense.
A real biggie for me in Montessori is around the children's agency and the way that that's respected and nurtured in a Montessori environment. So that idea that children have this sort of innate capacity and self-efficacy and growing degrees of autonomy as well. I think when that's nurtured in a Montessori environment, then children have a sense of possibility and a sense of independence as well.
Maria Montessori did not create activities that taught peace. Instead, she created a system that encourages peace as a natural aspect of the personality. The absence of rewards and punishments in the Montessori approach also strongly supports the idea of peace coming from within a person. Children develop in such a way that they're not completing tasks to gain the approval from an adult. They're completing tasks because they want to, and therefore, when choices are made, they're based on what the child believes is the right thing to do, without fear of a consequence. Being aware of how an adult may support or restrict the child's growing independence through their actions is an essential reflection that's made within the Montessori classroom, helping teachers consider their actions, both in the classroom and within society.
When Montessori writes about cosmic education, she's writing about the interconnectivity of life and the universe. So it's this very comprehensive and holistic approach to education. And I think it perhaps differs from traditional education because it goes beyond acquiring knowledge and it encompasses the development of the whole person.
Underlying respect for every single person in that classroom that then becomes an extension of respecting people in the community and in the wider world. To me, that's the basis of what peace education is all about.
The social emotional education that children get is what will help reconstruct society. She wrote that in the early 1900s, before anyone was even thinking about it. So she was intuitive.
This instilling of respect throughout Montessori education. And I think that it starts in the classroom, but it goes into the cultural subjects and it goes into learning about the wider world and understanding our small part of the wider world. I think all of those things contribute to that peace education component of Montessori education.
So Montessori believed that children who are given a cosmic education have a really sound understanding of the natural world and of their place in that world as well.
The International Montessori Institute works in partnership with education professionals in all sectors, from early years settings through to higher education providers, to create a unique, child-centred approach to education. The Institute is a partnership between the Carnegie School of Education at Leeds Beckett University and the Montessori Group. It supports the development of accredited Montessori programmes and actively researches the impact of the Montessori method. The Institute's research themes are very much rooted in the work of Maria Montessori and how to improve professional practice in order to enhance the educational experience of the children. For more information, go to leedsbeckett.ac.uk/IMI. And don't forget to join our conversation with our 3 Twilight sessions and conference in June. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram.